Hey, you're back. Welcome to Season 2 of The People We Meet. My name is Ty Bruner, and I'll be your host. This is a show about ordinary people that have done extraordinary things. I'm glad you're here, and let's get on with it. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The People We Meet. This is part 2 of a rather fire and brimstone part 1 of the trouble with those pesky immigrants. So take a deep breath. Now that we've walked through the history, the hypocrisy, the fear and the facts, all the things that we keep getting wrong, it's time to talk about the part nobody ever seems to understand, how the immigration system actually works. Because if there's one thing I've learned doing this show, it's that most of the people screaming the loudest about the border have absolutely no idea what the process is, what the law says, or what the reality for the people is going through it. So today, we're bringing back somebody who does. He's been on the show before, one of our most downloaded episodes actually, because he breaks down immigration law like a human being instead of a robot. He cuts through the noise, the myths, the political theater, and he tells the truth based on what he sees every single day in the courtroom, detention centers, and consultation rooms. He's an immigration attorney who actually lives this stuff, not just comments on it from a bar stool. So let's get into it. Let's talk about what's real, what's bullshit, and what America needs to know if we're ever going to break this cycle. On the show today is attorney Sam Smith. Counselor, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate being back.
So we covered a fair amount of material the last time that we spoke. I've got a lot of things have changed since then, and I thought it would be prudent to revisit because I figured you might have some more to share.
It is hard to believe that it's only been about a year since we last talked.
True enough.
Yeah.
Well, I've got a load of questions for you, so if you're ready, I'm going to fire one off.
Yeah, let's jump right into it.
All right. So let's start simple. What is the biggest thing Americans think they understand about immigration law and that they absolutely don't?
Yeah, I think that Americans generally think that the immigration system is a lot more forgiving, is a lot more welcoming than it actually is. Oftentimes when I hear immigration opponents talk about our immigration system, they describe a system more like what I wish it would be. The last time we had major immigration reform was about 3 decades ago. And it's kind of referred to as the criminalization of immigration law. It introduced a lot of these bars and barriers for people accessing permanent status in the United States, especially through family. So, for instance, one thing that people oftentimes think is that if you have a U.S. citizen child or if you U.S. citizen spouse, you have a direct path to residency, it's no problem. And in some cases, that might be true. But oftentimes, even with U.S. citizen family members, many of them, you might not have any pathway to residency in the United States, at least not without departing the United States for a decade. We have these things called, unlawful presence bars. So if someone's been here without status and they need to leave the country in order to process for their residency, if they've been here for more than a year without status, they can't come back for 10 years.
And that was under the Clinton administration, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. And so the issues we're talking about today, I want to be really clear. We're going to focus a lot on this current presidential administration, but these are issues and problems that have been planted and cultivated and ignored by administrations across the political spectrum. And so these bars we're talking about, it used to be that if someone entered without inspection, meaning they just crossed the border, didn't have any contact with immigration, it's an unlawful entry. It used to be that if they got married to a U.S. citizen, they would have to consular process, meaning they'd have to go back to their home country, go to an interview at an embassy, but there was no bars. So you get married to a U.S. citizen, you can leave, there's no issue to returning. At this point, maybe you enter on a visitor visa. You stay for a year beyond you were allowed to stay on that visa. Get married to a U.S. citizen, maybe have a couple kids. If you want to process, that's simple. You entered with a visa, that gives you permission to be able to process in the United States. If you enter without inspection, like we talked about before, you are required to return. But if you overstay for that year, you have that 10-year bar to returning. And so for a lot of people, they might have an attenuated process to residency, but that involves either being separated from their family for 10 years or relocating their entire family, many of whom don't have any connection to whatever home country they're returning to. There's a reason why a lot of DACA recipients especially refer to the United States as a golden cage, was because we talk about the United States as this land of opportunity where there's this freedom, there's a way to get ahead in life, but you can't leave. And if you do, you're prevented from returning.
Explain DACA recipients.
Yeah, great question. So the Obama administration, he put into a program into place called Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And so that was for individuals who arrived under the age of 16. A lot of them brought by family. Some of them arrived on their own. And it created a pathway for them to get what we call deferred action, which is essentially the government saying that we're not going to try to remove you. We're not going to try to deport you from the United States. And while you have deferred action, you can get a work permit. You can go to school, you can participate in life in a lot of ways we would want people to be able to participate. That program has been under attack pretty much since it was created, but somewhat unbelievably to me, it's hard to believe that it still currently exists in that current state. They're not accepting new applications, but those who have DACA are able to maintain it and renew it. And so it is a temporary program for childhood arrivals to be able to remain here in the United States.
Got it. So explain to people how hard it actually is to come here legally. What are the real steps, the wait times, the bottlenecks?
Mm-hmm.
Because I know that has changed dramatically recently, but it became increasingly difficult over the years, right?
Yeah, I'd say we set certain quotas for our family-based immigration. So actually, let me take a step back. When we're talking about getting permanent status here in the United States, there are 4 main ways in which that can happen. One is through family. The other are what we call humanitarian forms of immigration. There's employment-based immigration, and then there's the diversity visa or the visa lottery. So, go.
Wow. And does U.S. military service, is that considered employee-based?
So it is possible to expedite certain processes and maybe get a little bit of preferential treatment when going through the immigration process if you are a service member, but it is no longer possible for non-residents and non-citizens to be able to join the military. And so at this point, there is no pathway for someone who is not already a permanent resident, not already a citizen, to join the military.
Okay. And that changed because I served with several guys that weren't citizens at the time of the enlistment, but became citizens later.
Yeah. So that changed, I believe, you might want to fact check me on this, but during the Obama administration, I believe it's called the MAVNI program that went away. And so it was, you could have been here, without any form of status and be able to enlist in the military to get pathway to residency. But yeah, that no longer exists.
Okay. All right, sorry about this. So we were talking about the real steps and the wait times and the bottlenecks and whatnot.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we're talking about family-based processing, we set quotas, a certain number of visas. And so when we talk about visas in the family-based process, that really talking about residency, talking about a pathway to citizenship. So we set a total number of visas per year for different categories. And so if you have a U.S. citizen family member, you are their spouse, you are their parent, we call those immediate relatives. If you're the unmarried child of a U.S. citizen under the age of 21, you are an immediate relative. We have no visa caps there. That is unlimited. Every other family-based process that allows people to get residency has some sort of cap to it. So, for instance, if we talk about siblings of U.S. citizens, you can petition for your sibling. You can, when we say petition, it's asking them to get residency, whether overseas or they're here in the United States. But right now, the government is processing cases that were filed around 2001. Maybe it's advanced a little bit, but it's in the early 2000s. And so when I say that, people are like, oh, wow, it's backlogged like 22, 23, 24 years. And realistically, it's a few to several decades, because every single year that we've had these quotas, really from what we're talking about, the early 2000s, we have exceeded our visa caps every year, except for 2020 during COVID. And so in those situations, it's not just, hey, we're processing cases from back then and we're moving forward one day at a time. It is, how many applications were filed that day? How many are we working through? And so there's different wait times for adult children of U.S. citizens or for spouses of permanent residents, but all of those have visa caps and some level of backlog that is preventing them from being able to access residency immediately in the United States, whether they're here or applying for them overseas.
And nobody, regardless of the path, contrary to popular belief, nobody gets chance to jump to the front of the line.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people would like to have that option, and many people like to pay for it. There are some spots in employment-based immigration, and let me be very honest. When we start talking about employment-based immigration, this is going outside my remit. This is not in my lane, but there are certain forms of employment-based immigration where it's possible to pay for expedited processing. But usually those are types of visas that don't have numerical caps, but it's based on some sort of exceptional ability or investment in the United States.
And what was, I should know this. So what's there was just a hefty price tag that was put on certain types of visas by the Trump administration. It's like $100,000 or...
Yeah, so that was the Trump administration saying for, I believe it was for H-1B visas, which is a type of temporary work visa. And so that's this putting on the $100,000 application fee or kind of approval fee in that case, and it's really just trying to stop non-citizen temporary workers coming into the United States. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And if I can continue, sorry.
Please.
Yes. So talking about the different pathways. So we have this family process. In some ways, it can be straightforward, but there are many people who have U.S. citizen family members that effectively have no real shot at being able to get residency in the United States. I've talked to dozens, if not hundreds of people in my career where they're saying, maybe they're 40, 50, 60 years old, and they say, I want to file for my brother. I want to file for my adult sister. Mm-hmm. And I have to have the conversation where it's like, you can submit that application. We can start that process, but it is likely that neither of you will be alive by the time it is approved. And there are ways in which, we are limited in the way I think that we would traditionally the United States considers a family unit as well. When we're talking about family-based processing, we're really only talking about parents, children, and siblings. And I know I've consulted with many people who want to petition for their grandparents or aunts and uncles who are like parents to them. And that is just not an option that we have through family-based processing.
Gotcha.
If I can continue. Yeah.
It's yours. Yeah. The stage is yours.
Once I get going, sometimes it's hard to stop. So I also mentioned humanitarian forms of immigration. I know one of those is asylum, and we're going to get to that later, so I'll kind of hold off on that for a bit. Sure. But there are other options that were made available for humanitarian reasons, because we want to make sure that people are not marginalized or harmed in ways that they're not able to then find some sort of stability or escape from that situation. So, for instance, we have immigration pathways for people who are survivors of domestic violence or other serious crimes, who are survivors of human trafficking, either labor or sex trafficking. Some of those processes are relatively, I hesitate to say straightforward, because it's incredibly difficult having to bear your soul, your life to an immigration officer on paper, oftentimes talking about the most traumatic instances of your life.
Well, I was going to ask you about that, because what is there some way to substantiate that? Because if somebody wanted to come over and get in the United States bad enough, they would concoct any story to do it.
Yeah. And I'd say it is certainly, it's a balance that traditionally in immigration law they're trying to strike, because we want to make sure that we're not preventing people with meritorious claims who maybe don't have really strong hard evidence from, being able to access these programs. But at the same time, we want to make sure that, it's only people who qualify. And so it's best if you have police reports, or if you have medical records of abuse, or there's some court case related to either trafficking or harm that was done to you. But thankfully, I would say the law recognizes that if someone's in an abusive relationship, they're not generally going to be having access to the sort of records that we'd be wanting. So, for instance, if you're trying to apply for protection under the Violence Against Women Act, you have to show that your abuser, that the perpetrator was a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. And it's going to be very hard sometimes to be able to have their birth certificate, because they are probably going to be incredibly controlling, and it's a risky situation to try to get that sort of evidence. But they allow for other forms of evidence. So if you have your marriage certificate and it lists on there that their birthplace was, Spokane, Washington, that's something that they can consider. And really they would at that point consider the totality of the circumstances. And so, this is kind of timely. This week, I was consulting with an individual who I believe, and I would argue has a very clear and good claim under the Violence Against Women Act, but unfortunately for that, it either requires battery or extreme cruelty. And this person was never physically harmed.
Mm-hmm.
Their admission, they were never hit, hair was never pulled, nothing like that. But from everything that they have told me and from the corroborating evidence I have seen, they were subjected to extreme cruelty. But I have to tell them that in these sorts of cases, that is not a guarantee. I can believe you. I can be 100% confident that you are true, but we have to present your story on paper in a way that some immigration officer in some office building or processing center is going to read this and actually believe it. And that can just, especially with the way this administration is effectuating immigration enforcement, is just really scary for individuals, where we've created these systems where we want people who are victims, people who've been marginalized and harmed, to be able to come forward and to be able to participate in society and to find some amount of accountability for the actions that were done to them. But then now, in order to do so, they have to give their information. They have to give, addresses. They have to give, the schools their children go to immigration. And so I've talked with multiple people in the last year that have not wanted to move forward with cases that I do believe are meritorious cases that would have a high chance of success, because of that fear and that risk. And I can't say that they're acting unreasonably.
Understood. Let's see. Can you now? I know this is kind of review because we did talk about this once before, but I think this is it's valuable enough that it's worth revisiting. Can you break down the difference between asylum, refugee status, visas, and illegal entry in plain English?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll start with refugee and refugee status, asylum status, or if you're a refugee or an asylee. To some degree, those two statuses, those two processes have the same definition. So you have to prove that you were harmed or that you will be harmed if you return to your home country because of certain factors. That can be because of someone's race, religion, national origin, social group, or political opinion. It is only if it's on the basis of those 5 things. So, I have talked with multiple people, for instance, from the country of Haiti, that is in complete breakdown. There is gang violence and the lack of government control over so many basic functions of life. Unfortunately, I can talk to someone and I can 100% believe that they are at risk, that they will likely be harmed or killed if they return back to Haiti. But because the harm is generalized, there's not a specific purpose or reason behind it, they would not necessarily have a clear asylum case. This might be different if they're politically active and they're being targeted for those beliefs, but the general person that I'm talking to, that's going to be really hard to prove.
Okay.
And so refugee or asylee, it's because of persecution, serious harm, and for those particular reasons. If we're talking about visas, this is where it gets a little confusing as well, is because
I remember trying to sort through this last time.
Because we can talk about, I think the clearest way to go about it is we're talking either about immigrant or non-immigrant visas, which is kind of confusing because if we're saying immigrant visa, we're essentially talking about permanent residency or a pathway to citizenship. So if someone is applying for an immigrant visa, that would be maybe I have a spouse overseas and I'm trying to apply for them to come here. I'm applying for an immigrant visa for them. When they arrive, they have a visa in their passport, but it is a direct pathway to citizenship.
Okay.
If we're talking about non-immigrant visas, that's going to be something more like a visitor visa or a student visa or a temporary worker visa, which has no direct pathway to residency or citizenship on its own. But when we say visa, that really is some permission, some authorization to enter the United States or attempt to enter the United States that is given to an individual, and so
for a specific purpose and for a certain period of time.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So even if someone's getting an immigrant visa, so if they enter the United States, they're a permanent resident on a direct pathway to citizenship. Even those are time bound, where they have to enter within 6 months, or else it's gone and that's expired. But it is that authorization, like you said, time bound for a specific purpose, specific reason.
So then that brings us to the illegals, which everybody, the illegal this, illegal that. So illegals, and originally to me, were people that, swam the river, jumped the wall, that, obviously. and those who overstayed their visas.
Yeah.
They're overstayed their non-immigrant visas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that when we're talking about an unlawful entry, I might accidentally throw out. So we'll just define it now. If I say EWI, that's EWI. That stands for entry without inspection.
Okay.
That's kind of what we're talking about. Someone who just swims across the river, crosses through the desert, whatever that is. That is someone who is an undocumented immigrant, unauthorized entry. You hit it nail right on the head with that as well. It can include, or my terminology would be undocumented immigrant. That also considers people who have overstayed visas, who had authorization, had permission to enter the United States, but have stayed beyond their authorized stay. And I think the thing that people don't realize sometimes is that the line between someone who was undocumented and someone who is documented, who has papers, who has a direct pathway to citizenship, sometimes is razor thin. Mm-hmm. I mentioned someone could have entered on a visitor visa 20 years ago, been here this entire time, had no status in the United States, and if they are married to a U.S. citizen now, they fall in love with someone at work or just in their community, arguably it's a relatively straightforward path to be able to get residency for them, to be able to process with them here in the United States, getting on a direct pathway to citizenship. Mm-hmm. Now, every case is incredibly fact dependent. There's so many people I talk to that on their face seems like it's a direct pathway, and then there's some roadblock, there's some wall in our way. But I think that when we're talking about undocumented immigrants, I also just want to take a moment to speak, as we're talking about, I think what the best estimates are somewhere around 13 million people in our communities. And many people are recent arrivals, maybe in the last decade. But we also have people who have been here for several decades, people who have entire lives here, who own businesses, who are pillars of their community. And I don't think you're saying this, but I also want to be clear that just because someone is an undocumented immigrant who entered without authorization, that does not make them a criminal, and it does not make them a bad person. Yeah. I think a lot of times in the broader conversation, that's what gets lost, where something that's on the same level as a speeding ticket, a civil infraction, is allowing a large portion of our country to paint, 10 plus million people in our country, our neighbors, our friends, our family members, as evil people, as people who don't deserve humanity in the way that I believe everyone does. Even the people who I think are evil, I think they still deserve humanity, and I will fight for, our immigrant friends and family members to maintain, to be given that humanity. That I even hate that phrasing because it is theirs. It is not. We can't take it away. But I want to be really clear when talking about undocumented immigrants that they are people, and they are so important to our communities, and to say otherwise is kind of flies in the face of reality.
Absolutely. And to be identified as, or quantified as a number first and a person second.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add to that?
We can move on.
Okay. Now, we always hear open borders. From a legal perspective, is there any universe in which America has open borders right now?
Yeah, that is, we are seeing a lower amount of southern border traffic than we have at any time in my lifetime, at least. Mm-hmm. I'd say the Trump administration, the first time around, the Biden administration continued, and the second time around with the Trump administration has just increased bans on entry and bans on asylum for people who enter at the southern border. And so we have seen that have a real impact. We are seeing this level of enforcement that is inhumane, that is cruel, that only serves to, line the pockets of private prison companies, has caused people to no longer view the United States as a place of safety and freedom. And it is both disincentivized coming here, it is disincentivized remaining here, and it has made seeking humanitarian protection in the United States infinitely more difficult. We do not have open borders. At no point have we had open borders. There's always been some amount of penalty to entering the United States without authorization. There's always been some route that someone had to go that was fraught and had a lot of legal requirements to have any amount of success in gaining legal status in the United States. But that is certainly not true now.
Now, let's talk about the numbers for just a second, because you said that starting with Trump 1.0, the crackdown started, continued with the Biden administration, and then now it's really, the screws have really tightened down now. That said, I mean, if the Biden administration was sort of continuing on with the crackdown, how do you account for the number of border crossings or contacts that took place in 2020, in 2021? I think it was 2020 and 21.
Yeah, and I'd say the patterns of migration, especially from Central and South America, I mean, these have been patterns that have been building for a couple of decades now. We really started to see this at the very beginning of it, the late 80s, early 90s, but this is something that has continued to build, and there has been a continued consistent, head in the sand attitude from both parties in terms of how we're going to deal with this or respond to these patterns of migration. I'd say a lot of the issues that we saw, because we talked about these high levels of contacts, which is true and fair. It's also because we are seeing a destabilization of countries in our region, both with a rising authoritarianism, a rising level of gang violence that is oftentimes armed by U.S. guns, and it is fueled by a United States demand for illegal drugs that are being created in those countries, and so there are these rising contacts that we just have not responded to or prepared. We have these people, families, children, individuals, adults who are just saying, I cannot find safety in my home and I need to go somewhere safer and better. I know so few people that I've worked with that would prefer to be in the United States if they could make a safe, livable home in their home country. It is just, we talk about these push and pull factors, and when I say that, it's, being pushed from their home country and being pulled to the United States. And I think that, the Trump administration was responding to that, and very dishearteningly for me, they've been incredibly successful, both at ignoring the push factors, destroying the pull factor, and just really increasing, frankly, just human misery in regards to the border and family reunification and having any chance of success at finding safety in the United States. Yeah.
Fair enough. I couldn't argue that at all. So along with that, people say immigrants are committing a wave of crime.
Yeah.
And you actually see the data. What's the truth?
I mean, we know data has shown, study after study has shown that immigrants commit crimes at rates lower than U.S.-born Americans. And that's not to say that there are no immigrants who are ever going to commit crimes. We know that happens. But in the same way that I would hope that we can all still agree that, we don't believe in collective punishment. That doesn't, just because one immigrant or one person of whatever characteristic, one Afghan, commits a heinous crime that, should not have happened and is a travesty, that does not mean that we should be painting with a broad brush about a population of people.
Absolutely. And I think it produces the outcry that it has because it's been shouted about so loudly. And, it's like, it's disheartening when something like that, I mean, it's disheartening no matter what.
Yeah.
But it doesn't further the case.
Yeah.
Or,
And I mean, I guess if I can kind of somewhat set our conversation in time, I mean, if we're talking about this shooting in DC by this Afghan national, everyone that I know agrees that is a terrible act, and that it is a tragedy that saddens all of us. And it only increases the suffering in our world to punish unrelated parties for it. I can't tell you how it's been several conversations I've had since that shooting in DC where I've talked with an Afghan American who wants to petition for their spouse or their parents and wants to reunify. And at this point, the Trump administration has paused any decisions. There's a travel ban in place for that country. And they come at me with these questions of like, it is one person. Like, why is my whole community, why am I being punished for this? And it is it's an undeniable fact of reality that there will be people who want to harm other people and want to, violate our societal norms. And I think we should be trying to build systems and creating a reality in which that happens as little as possible. I do not think, I actually think the opposite, that the way that we are, trying to enforce immigration laws and trying to pressure people to stay in the margins or to leave the United States is making us less safe and is creating more harm, more pain in our country.
Agreed. Here's another one. They're taking our jobs. And this is, legally and economically, how accurate is that? Because, this is the same shit that we've been saying for 100 plus years, blaming whatever wave of immigrants have come over, have taken our jobs.
Yeah. Again, it's nice to have my feelings, but also it's really nice to have consistent economic study after study show that we need immigration. From a demographic perspective, from an economic perspective, the largest percentage of job that exists within my client base is a caretaker. If you took away immigrants in our communities, there would not be enough non-workers, U.S. non-workers, to be able to fill these caretaking roles. And that's not even considering service workers and farm workers and construction workers that they are filling roles that many people do not want to fill, but also just that we don't have the numbers to fill. We are losing population without immigration. The economic impact of immigration is only positive. And I'm not trying to say that there's no limit to that. At some point, we might hit some cap where all of a sudden it becomes a difficult situation. But from the world in which we're working in and where we've seen immigration come into the United States, it has only been a net positive in terms of rates of entrepreneurship, taxes paid into the system. They fill the roles that, many American-born people just will not fill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this isn't, I don't think these are just studies. this is history talking too.
Mm-hmm.
Several chapters of it, as I poetically covered it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then the latest one, and this one I just had to shake my head. To me, it's baffling. It sounds like utter nonsensical bullshit. But the latest one is immigrants are raising housing costs and even beef prices. And I would love for you to explain how absurd that claim actually is, or is there any validity behind it?
You will find some studies that say that there are some level of immigration does impact housing prices. I'd say that is not something that doesn't have any validity to it. The counterpoint to that is also in the last couple of years, especially 2022, 2023, where we did have those really high rates of migration, both at the southern border and through the various programs that the Biden administration created for people to be able to come to the United States. We saw a slowdown or a decreasing of housing prices across the country. And so I'd say that while there might be an impact, there is not a one-to-one more immigration means more expensive housing. We also see immigrants tend to move into more depressed areas of towns, of cities, of regions, and kind of play a revitalizing role. And so it is also, you mentioned beef prices. I can't tell you what would happen to beef prices if all of a sudden we lost a lot of our meat processors that exist in our immigration system.
And that's in the labor force. But they're not, number one, like with the housing.
Yeah.
I find it difficult to believe that, people are coming over here with enough pocket money to buy a house.
Mm-hmm.
I just highly unlikely. And number two, the claim was that they're, crossing the borders with their diseased cattle and infecting.
Yeah, that's
come on.
That's ridiculous. Yeah, and honestly, and this is straying a little bit outside of my bounds, but if we're worried about, disease in our agriculture, especially our cattle and our animals that we're raising for food or for whatever reason in the United States, we should be focusing more on oversight of those factory farms that are making sure that they're upholding health standards and making sure that the food that's being produced for the United States is healthy and good for us. And I feel like that is something that is being walked away from by this administration. They're saying one thing in a way that kind of scores them points with the anti-immigrant crowd. And almost all of their actions otherwise are really undercutting those claims.
Okay. And that's kind of what I thought. So kind of changing gears a little bit, what does the process actually look like for somebody arriving at the border seeking asylum? So, walk us through it from the moment they arrive.
Yeah. And so I can tell you historically what that's like. I can also tell you what that's like now.
Please.
And so I'll start with now. Essentially, asylum at the southern border is functionally dead. The bans that have been put in place over the last couple of administrations, only strengthened during Trump 2.0, have made it so that he's declared there to be an invasion. And because of this invasion, there's no way to come to the southern border and claim asylum. And so realistically, if someone wants to try to enter the United States, they might be able to apply for some level of protection. We have other forms that exist outside of asylum, which it could be a whole other episode on its own. But they're not pathways to residency. They're not pathways to citizenship. They're not permanent statuses, especially with the way this administration is pursuing third country removals. And so in the recent past, if someone was coming to the United States to claim asylum, there's kind of two ways you could do it at the southern border. One is approaching at a port of entry. So you could, like at a foot crossing between San Ysidro and Tijuana, like by San Diego, you could approach at a port of entry and say, I'm claiming asylum. You're just immediately presenting yourself to a border official. A lot of other individuals, they would just cross the river, cross the desert. And some people, they would cross and they would try to evade immigration. I can't deny that. But a large number of individuals would cross and immediately flag down and try to find border officials because they're trying to seek some amount of stability and honestly try to follow the system, try to follow the process in the United States. Once they've contacted officials, they are supposed to have, within a week, what's something called a credible fear interview. During that time, they might be detained. They might be released and told to check in at an office, wherever their destination is. And I want to stop just for a second and say that the rates of people following through on their check-ins, on their court appearances are incredibly high. The people are worried about people, migrants crossing the border.
And then they hide out.
And those who are contacted by immigration who are in the system, their rates of attendance at what they need to attend are incredibly high. I have seen that be impacted recently, but that is because of the arbitrary detentions that are happening, both at check-ins with immigration officials and court hearings. And so really the level of enforcement is counterproductive to what we want.
People are scared, man.
Yeah. And you can't blame them. I would be terrified too. And but so someone's scheduled for the credible fear interview. And in that situation, they're being talked to by an official and they're just trying to hear someone's story for why, assuming they fear returning to their home country, why they fear returning. At that point, it is really trying to determine, do we believe them? Like, is it a legitimate reason to fear returning? If they pass that, then they're scheduled for a court hearing. And again, some individuals could be detained if they do have some prior immigration violations or criminal history. Sometimes it's kind of for whatever reason. We tend to see it a lot with young men, where it seems arbitrary, where they get detained. Others, they are essentially they have some place where they're going. Could be Spokane, Washington, and then they're set for a check-in date with ICE and a court hearing with the Department of Justice. And then at that point, it really just is keeping in touch with those immigration officials, following through with the system, going to your court hearings, trying to find an attorney, because the asylum process is almost impossible to win without an attorney unless you have the most clear-cut case. But unfortunately,
attorneys cost money.
Attorneys cost money, or at Manzanita House where I work, we're able to provide those services free of charge, but that makes our capacity very limited, because of grants and funding that we have. And we face across the country, but especially in Central and Eastern Washington, we face a generational lack of investment in legal services broadly, but also especially with immigration. And so we see the need that we cannot meet. And so there's a lot of people. This includes children, going to court hearings on their own, no representation. You have a right to an attorney in immigration proceedings if you can find one, if you can afford one. There is no government attorney that will be provided to you. And so you will see instances where there will be 2, 3, 4-year-olds who are in court facing a judge, facing a government attorney, and they're expected to try to establish that they should have eligibility to remain in the United States. Like it is a farce in those situations, and in many others, I would argue. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because the next question is, what's something you see in the system that would shock the average American? And the image of a 2, 3, or 4-year-old arguing to a judge why they should be allowed to stay in America, I find shocking.
Yeah, and you can guess that the outcomes are not favorable to the youth. Yeah,
No, probably not.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from that, what else? What's something else that you see from the inside that you think other people would be quite shocked to know?
Again, I referenced this a little bit earlier, but I talk to a lot of people who think you have a U.S. citizen child, there's no way that you're going to be deported. You have a spouse, there's no way that you could be removed. And these family separations happen all the time. Having a relative can be a matter of discretion, but it is not on its own necessarily a way to get status or to be able to stay in the United States. I mean, we have a client who their husband was deported, and they decided to leave with them, and they have U.S. citizen children, and their children have no connection to their home country. They have never known any other country besides the United States, and they're not technically deported, but they're constructively, functionally, those children were removed from the United States. What else are their parents to do in that situation? And so we see. I mean, we've been working with family preparedness plans so that if someone who is a parent is detained while they're at work, while their kids at school, that there's someone who can make decisions for them. That every day people are having to worry about being separated from these tender age children that cannot fend for themselves or make decisions for themselves, and that if this happens, if their parents are removed or detained for any period of time, that there's a decent chance that they get put into foster care, into the state system. And I just think that so many people assume that if you hear the pejorative term anchor baby, that you have a U.S. citizen child, you're set, and realistically that child, even if they could do something for you from an immigration perspective, a child can't petition for a parent until you're 21, and so you come here, have a kid, there's 21 years that you have to wait until there's even a chance that they could do something for you. And so these family separations, they're not just common, they're built into the system.
It's almost not even a real thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've had so few instances where something like that has happened and been successful at helping their parent out. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but at the same time, it's more and more rare to see people who have been around for 20 years and who haven't been able to normalize their status or haven't been removed and haven't been deported from the United States. Mm-hmm. It is not this simple pathway, and it does result in these family separations. It results, I mean, this is an aside, but we've talked about military service before. There are so many veterans who have been deported from the United States. There's this perception that, and I think rightly so, that if someone is willing to put their life on the line to defend this country, that they should have protection from being removed. But we know that there are permanent residents, there are non-citizens in the military, and if they, make a mistake, they maybe, have a drug charge. I'm not gonna lie. There's something that's gone on, but at the same time, you can't tell me that there's not at least some of those situations where their reliance on, on drugs, on some other medicating factor, is not in some ways tied to their service in the military, is not tied to some. Right. And we're turning our backs on our children. We're turning our backs on our service members, and that is not. That is just part of the system. That is not a thing that we have forgotten to patch or to fix, but it is something that's been known, and we have chosen to do nothing about it.
Okay. So I guess I'm confused.
Yeah.
So clarify this for me. Like, okay, you talked about, the reliance on drugs or whatever. Now that, to me, if I'm understanding you correctly, that's what drew the unwanted attention that led to the legal trouble that led to deportation, even though you may have been dishonorably discharged. Mm-hmm. Is that what you're saying?
Well, so I mean, and this isn't even necessarily tied to like how they were separated from their service. They could have been honorably discharged, but then later came into some sort of issue. But because at least as we're functioning now, you have to at least be a permanent resident in order to be in the military. And so if someone has that permanent status, there needs to be some sort of status violation in order to to have immigration enforcement brought against you. So it could be a drug charge, it could be some criminal charge, or you're outside of the United States for too long. But there is something that does bring you to their attention.
So let's say that you joined the military.
Yeah.
The year before, you had to be a citizen to join the military.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You stayed in the military, and then then you were honorably discharged. Mm-hmm. You're not a citizen. You have to go there, and at that point, just because you served, you don't have a pathway.
Yeah, and I think the thing that sometimes is hard for people, and this is with immigrants as well, is they will assume that a lot of these things should just kind of happen as a matter of course.
Right.
That it should automatically happen. But so many processes require active pursuit, and so if you are not kind of prompt on when you need to be pursuing these things, mm-hmm. You might either make things more difficult, or you might lose out on the opportunity to pursue.
So what does that guy do? The guy that joined the year before they changed the rules, mm-hmm. because he joined going, hey, if I join the Marines, I can become a U.S. citizen, only to find out that that's not true.
And so I will say, if someone joined during that time, it is my understanding that they would be able to follow through with that system. I guess.
So they're kind of grandfathered in.
Yeah.
Okay.
But again, they still have affirmative steps that they have to take, and it is not just because you did, now you automatically have this.
Sure.
Yeah.
So what are those steps? Because if it hadn't been for the military that mm-hmm. you thought was your pathway in, mm-hmm. you find that you don't have one, what do they do?
Yeah, and so it really, the classic attorney answer, it depends, but with everything, there are very long and complicated forms that people have to fill out. There's supporting documentation that they have to provide, which can seem reasonable, but especially if you're working with people who are, have limited English proficiency. I work with people who have limited mental capacity, who are survivors of trauma, and are really just kind of focusing on base level survival things, mm-hmm. Without some amount of legal assistance, of someone walking you through the 24-page green card application with about 90 yes or no questions asking if you're a terrorist or if you've done something terrible. Sure. That is a barrier to so many people, that because they're terrified of doing something wrong. Mm-hmm. They're terrified of filling in the wrong bubble or providing the wrong documentation, and mm-hmm. I think that's a reasonable response. But for a lot of people, then the delay means that they lose out on some opportunity.
I got you.
As an example, apart from our military example we've been talking about, there is a pathway for immigrant youth who have been abandoned, abused, or neglected by one or both of their parents. It's called Special Immigrant Juvenile Classification. That is only available to youth under the age of 21 here in the state of Washington. In some states, it's under 18. It just depends on, the state. And there are times where that's a hard cap. There is no sort of equitable reason why they might, count someone as younger in that process. And so someone could be escaping from an abusive parent, and they're just trying to survive, find a place to live, get food in their bellies, and then all of a sudden they turn 21. They could have been the perfect candidate for that process, but because they're 21, that's just gone. There's no way to get that back. And so in that situation, it's those timing things in immigration really make or break a lot of these processes.
So it's in your best interest to take care of business if there's some business to be taken care of.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay. So we discussed the origins of the system, mm-hmm. and how at the time it worked. But now, years later, whether the system is deteriorated or it's broken or it's outdated. Anyway, how broken is the system really, and where is it broken? Is it the courts and policy, enforcement, resources?
Yeah, I mean, can I answer all of the above? I mean, I think that the policy, certainly, like I said, we haven't had structural immigration reform in 30 years. And I think that there's something broken when we have the majority of America saying that DACA recipients should have a pathway to residency and citizenship. And we've had no movement on that. It's been over a decade that, 60-some% of America says that. 60% of America doesn't agree on almost anything. And yet we have no immigration movement for DACA recipients. There's a failure in policy. Mm-hmm. We also have there's something inherent with our immigration system, is that it is so driven by whoever the executive is. The president sets so much policy, and so there is this whiplash. a year ago, I could have a chance of calling up an ICE attorney for a client, like for a case I have in court, and discuss the case with them and say, this is why I think that we should get this case dismissed. My client has these opportunities to get status or to be able to have a pathway to residency, and they say, yeah, why are we in court? That is effectively gone. That is both at the government attorney level. Also, discretion is almost gone for immigration judges. Their ability to set cases how they want to terminate cases if they think it is in the service of either efficiency or justice, that is gone. We mentioned enforcement. I mean, we see mothers being pulled out of cars with their kids still in the car. Like, who is that serving for us to do that? And for the enforcement levels to change on a whim, one president says we want 110,000 people in detention, and so now we're going to arrest the lowest hanging fruit. The Obama administration, they had said initially that they wanted to focus on detaining like hardened criminals, people who are actually threats to our communities. And I'll be honest, there's reporting at the time that ICE officials did not like that because those are harder people to detain. It is easier to find someone who is picking up their kid from daycare than it is to find a criminal wherever they are hiding out. And so we have this enforcement right now that is so indiscriminate. There are a lot of people, I've talked to a lot of people who voted for President Trump who, when he said we're going to be going after the criminals, they believed him. Now, I would argue you shouldn't have, but I want to coming out to them in good faith. He's like, you heard what he was saying, you believed him, you wanted safety. I think I'm grateful that I think most of our communities, most of America is coming around to the fact that the way that we are approaching immigration enforcement is not seeking safety. It is not seeking stability. We see that Homeland Security officers who are supposed to be investigating human trafficking are put on these routine detention runs. These broad sweeps that are indiscriminate and just kind of going for whoever. We see DEA agents and FBI agents taken off of their normal jobs to engage in immigration enforcement, and I think that that's a problem with this administration, but I also think that is a structural problem, a systemic problem that we have, where we can just play with the rules so easily, and there's no real responsive way to deal with that.
So while the system may have been broken in one way a couple of years ago or 11 months ago, it's broken in a whole new way now.
Yes, that is 100% true. And I think the thing that's especially difficult about immigration is that everyone agrees that it's broken. Yeah. It's just the different sides of the political spectrum agree that it's broken in different ways, and there's almost no middle ground.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like we're punishing the victims of a broken system as opposed to fixing it. Or
and I feel like I do have to say, I mean, like you said, it's victims of a broken system. It is also people that we have made our society reliant on. We talked about the labor force perspective of caretakers and farm workers, and we have built a society that requires immigrant labor, and then we turn around and make life a living hell for them. Like it is, I truly worry about our long-term status in the world because we are telling everyone, don't trust us. Even if you agree with one president or you like one set of policies, who's to say in 4 years it's not going to flip on its head and completely destroy? I mean, we see the way that the Trump administration is reacting to and talking about Afghans, for instance. And we spent 20 years telling Afghan nationals, help us, we will get your back in the end. And I would say we have done that to some degree. I'd say we failed to some degree, but I'd say it is an utter failing now, the way that we are just painting an entire nationality with a broad brush. But also strategically, what are we telling any other nationality of whatever foreign war in the future we get involved with to say, don't trust us? Like, we're going to turn our backs on you. Why would you want to work with the United States?
Yeah. I mean, I would think that if you're a Korean, if you came over here from Korea and all of a sudden it's in the news that that somebody from Korea committed a crime in the United States. Now all of a sudden we turn the guns on Korea.
Yeah, it's
on Koreans.
Everything just feels so short-sighted.
Yes. So I've heard the term "follow the money," whether it's conspiracy theories or whatever. But who benefits from the dysfunction that all of this causes? Because somebody, some way, somehow, somebody's benefiting from this mess.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I think that we will spend the next few decades figuring that out. I think that there's levels of corruption and levels of bad dealing that I think that we don't know. But I will say plainly, it is really clear that I do know is that private prison groups are benefiting greatly. When we talk about wanting to more than double the number of beds in immigration detention, that is benefiting private prison corporations that run immigration detention centers. When President Trump won his election, their stocks went sky high because everyone knew that that's what's going to happen. We as a country spend so much money on immigration detention that again, I argue does not serve the purposes of what we want it to. You know, if they are in immigration detention because they committed some sort of criminal act, we as a society have already put them through our criminal justice system and decided they paid their price. There are many people who are in there for mere status violations or for just going through the process and are now who are being detained for the sake of detention. You know, there's a story in Spokane out of June where these two youth were detained at a routine ICE check-in. They did not have criminal history. They were going through the system. They were going to a check-in. They were told to go to an ICE office, and they went because that's what you were supposed to do, and they were detained. And there's no reason for that. And what that is doing is putting, I don't know, probably, thousands and thousands of dollars per person per week in the pockets of these private prison groups.
Well, were they detained and released, or were they detained and sent to El Salvador?
Yeah, I mean, at least with these individuals, we do know that actually, I was going to say with these individuals, we do know that at least one of them chose to colloquially what would be called self-deport in the situation. And yeah, you bringing up, being taken to El Salvador. I mean, we are seeing a high rate of what, and I referenced this very briefly earlier, called third country removals. And there's these agreements that we are entering into with countries, essentially saying that they will take people from the United States. So if they have a fear, let's just say I'm an immigrant from El Salvador, and I believe that my government will torture me if I return. But lo and behold, Honduras or Uganda has said that we will take them. Then we can and have been removing people to these countries that they have no connection to, no tie to, and they say that they will give them a fair shake at the asylum process or for some form of humanitarian protection. But to be frank, don't trust this government to have done the due diligence to make sure that's actually happening, and is a severe threat to due process because these removals are happening at a moment's notice. If someone doesn't have an attorney on retainer to file a habeas case that's going to stop their removal from the United States, they're going to be removed, and it's just a really. As a legal practitioner, it's incredibly frustrating, just like on a technical basis, but it's also just so disheartening. Just as someone who grew up in the United States and know that what our role was, the values that we said we had, and it just feels like we've abdicated those so quickly.
Yeah, I agree. So what's a reform that you would actually make? Let me try again.
Yeah.
What's one reform that would actually make a difference tomorrow if we had the political will to do it?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. One would be getting rid of those bars that I talked about. I've consulted with, I don't know, several dozen people who would be on a pathway to citizenship if they could just depart and consular process of their home country. These are people who have no criminal history. They've been here for several years, decades plus. They're married to a U.S. citizen. They could have a stable life if they're just able to go back and process to the embassy. So if we got rid of those bars, there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that would be able to normalize their status the way that we want to.
Perfect sense.
And it's not even like practically, we'd get a lot more filing fees too. If we're just talking about like there's these things that like it is a simple change. It is also a return to how it used to be. We also used to have something, we still do technically, it's called the green card through registry. And it was the idea that if someone was here for about 20 years and they were otherwise qualified, they could just apply for residency. And this was something that was regularly updated until about 92. And so in 1992 was the last day that we updated the registry date. And so as of right now, if someone came to me and they've been in the United States since before 1972, we could just apply for a green card. But of course, I have never met someone who has been in the United States for that long who hasn't had some form of status that they were able to get.
What is the actual green card? I mean, I've been hearing that term my whole life.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is.
And so that is the physical proof of someone's permanent residency. We call it they're an LPR, a lawful permanent resident. And it's not purely green, but there's a lot of green tones on it. And especially when it got that name, it was on green paper and considered that. Yeah. And so if we would just go back to the registry, I think a lot of people would agree that if someone has been here for 20 years and they have not committed crimes, they are members of our community, they are just living their life with their families, why would we not want them to be full participants in our society?
Yeah.
I think that is an easy win. And both of these things that I've talked about, I could talk about a lot more structural changes that I think are probably a little bit more radical. But both of these things are returns to what we used to have. We used to have no bars for the unlawful presence. We had an updated registry. These aren't seismic, new, radical things. These are things that we did and at one point agreed were smart, good things for us to do.
So you've seen families torn apart, people stuck in limbo, asylum, detained on technicalities. Can you share a story without names that shows the human side that most people don't see?
Yeah, I wish that I had just a couple, and I think that right now, the last year I have been so grateful and so pained for like my frontline staff and our team at Manzanita House. So like our administrative assistant, our intake specialist, people who they see people coming in and they are in moments of crisis. A family member was just detained. They were transferred to a different detention center. There are these situations where their entire world, the foundation is crumbling and coming apart. And when we see these detentions, we see them being with oftentimes men who are playing the role as the breadwinner. And so we have people regularly coming to our office who are in tears, who are distraught, who do not know how they're going to provide for themselves and for their children because their spouse has been detained. Detention, which is so bad that people are choosing to return back to countries where they also fear for their life. And that is not a rare instance. I wish I could say that was one time that happened. This happens all the time. I mentioned very briefly as well that we had clients who are applying for asylum, have a legitimate fear of returning to their home country, but are choosing to return because their husband was deported. These are the U.S. citizen children. These are people who have a valid claim to make, an argument to remain in the United States, and they are choosing to give up their community and their life here so that they can stay together as a family. You mentioned family separations. I think that it can be not just as, but it can still be incredibly traumatic to fight to keep your family together. And these are decisions that so many people like you and I, hopefully will never have to make in our lives. And I think that if you really treat these people, as humans with families and with feeling and with the joy and pain that we all live with, the amount of anxiety and stress and terror that we're putting people through is...
I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
When people talk about invasion or poisoning the blood or they don't belong here, how does that land with the clients that you work with every day?
Yeah, a lot of the clients that I work with, to some degree, they kind of keep their head. They're just like, I need to do what I need to do. And so there are plenty that I work with where they have strong feelings and we talk about it. There's also some where just like, I don't want to make any waves because I don't want to mess up what I have going for me. We have a process in place. We have seen this administration respond to political speech in ways that I would argue is unconstitutional. But at the same time, like I talked about earlier with my Afghan clients, just kind of they have this shame that they carry for being where they're from or who they are. Nothing that they've done. But they just assume now if they say that they're from Afghanistan, and if they say that they're from a different country, from Latin America, from Venezuela, that someone is going to immediately put upon them all of these stereotypes, these ideas of invasion, of threat, of a danger to our society. And it makes them live a smaller life. People are changing their daily habits and their routines because of this rhetoric. We know that this country has a history of violence. We've seen this kind of, and I don't think it's unreasonable for people to say like, how am I to know if I'm not going to be in the middle of something that's going to threaten my life? You know, we've seen extremist action, and rhetoric like that only serves to rile that up, and to again, it does not serve public safety or an ordered society. It just serves to make us more divided.
Agreed. Now, these are kind of, I guess these are the last couple questions are kind of questions based on your expertise from the inside and projections looking forward. When you look at the last 10 years, what direction are we heading? Compassion, cruelty, chaos? Because I mean, from my seat in the nosebleed section, it's bleak.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that the historical trend has been moving towards cruelty. I mean, even with, again, outside of this administration, we have seen consistently our border be more militarized. And I think that people can say, hey, we need to think about public safety. I can respect that. I can say, yes, if we want to be safe, I can agree with those aims. I think it's also really important to identify and to name that the harder we make it to access the United States, the more people will die. We know that people do more dangerous river crossings and desert crossings. We also know that we have systems in place, we have structures and organizations in place that act with cruelty. There are stories out there of Customs and Border Protection finding stashes of water that people put out, and they will destroy them. It is this disincentivization that is trying to have one impact and is really having multiple. It is trying to say, you're not welcome here. But we also know that even though our border crossings are at near historic lows, people still attempt it. People will still try to enter the United States, whether they want to reunify with family or they still view us as a place of opportunity. That being said, I refuse to give up hoping. I see the way that so many people are responding to the actions taken by this administration. People who are standing up and saying things who I never would have expected to stand up and say things. And so I have to hope. And I do hope. I think this is a legitimate, real hope. This is not pie in the sky. You know, this is not Pollyanna-ish. That like we are seeing actions that on a broad scale, we say this is unacceptable. And I think it is really important for people to make that clear, to have those conversations with their friends and their family members, to call their representatives, even if they think they agree with them, or if they think that it's going to fall on deaf ears, because this pressure is important. And it is really important that when we have a friendlier administration, when we have someone who is willing to see the humanity in our immigrant communities and realize that we need our immigrant communities, that pressure is going to be a groundswell. And that groundswell is going to be fueled by people who are saying right now that this is not right, that this is enough of what is happening and we need to move to something better. So I say the trend in the past has been really difficult. It has been really hard to see, especially if you're actually willing to gaze at it like you were as you're going through your history of our immigration process in the United States. But I truly am hopeful that we are hitting a point where we're going to have people stand up and say, this is enough and we need something better.
Yeah, well said. if you could correct one narrative for the entire country in 20 seconds, what would you say? Sorry, that's it.
Yeah,
I know that's tough.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, I wish that I had a really neat, simple thing that was just like tied up ready for you perfectly. Because there's so many things I could talk about. I could talk about economic impact. I could talk about entrepreneurship. I could talk about the roles that immigrants play. But I think ultimately, this is broader than immigration, but I just want to undo the narrative of fear. We live in a society that speaks to and wants us to believe that we are living in such a state of scarcity. And it is really easy to say that I have my family, I have my community, I have my people who look like me or believe like me, and that is who I want to protect and that is who I want to defend. But that is such a sad perspective to have. The world is could be so much better if we look at it this perspective of abundance, of we can make a better world. We can build these futures that we might deem now to be impossible. And so I just this narrative of what we have is the best we're going to have. This narrative of we need to return to something. I know I talked about some policies that I think we can come back to, but I don't want to return to anything. I want to build a better future.
Yeah.
And just to get rid of this scarcity mindset, to get rid of this lack of imagination, I think is truly the broader narrative that I would love to just destroy.
That was really good. And, I really like, closing on a high note, closing on something positive, closing on something that, it's inspirational and provides a little bit of hope. But I got one more question for you.
Yeah.
I want to know from your perspective, why does immigration matter? Why should the average American care about getting this right?
Yeah, I think that to deny the reality that immigration will happen is to deny human existence. I have a friend who uses the phrase "people migrate," and that if you look at human history across as far back as you want to go, you will see that we as humanity, we will move around, we will find new experiences, we will build new things. And we want to do that right because I want to be a part of building something that is awesome, and I think that having people come to the United States and want to be a part of building something that is awesome, they're adding so many great things, whether it's food, culture, music, art, whatever it is, getting it right. Ultimately, it's the world that I want to live in. And if you're thinking about it from a United States perspective, it is the way in which we maintain our role in our world, in our hearts. We will fall by the wayside if we do not embrace immigration in a compassionate and smart way. And I think that should, at a practical level, terrify people. The way that we're acting is setting ourselves up for failure, and we need to get it right, because I would much rather see our country with a compassionate and smart immigration policy really lead the way in a way that it seems like is impossible right now in this world. It serves our best interests, both from a strategic standpoint, but I would also argue from a humanity, our hearts, the soul of our nation perspective.
When are you doing your TED Talk? That was good.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah.
Hey, man. That's all I got for you. I really appreciate you being here. That was a great talk.
Yeah.
You had a lot of excellent perspective and information, and I want to thank you.
I appreciate you just letting me run. Sometimes I don't know when to stop talking.
Well, you know what? You nailed it. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Well, that'll about do it for this episode of The People We Meet. I'd like to take a few seconds for some shout-outs. First, to my main man, J-Mac at Studio 42 Recordings for his audio prowess. Second, to my family for putting up with my recording shit scattered all over the dining room table, and for stopping to talk to random strangers wherever we go. And last, to my listeners. This isn't a big show, so it means a lot to me when somebody rolls up to me and says, "Hey man, when are you going to have out some more shows?" So if you know someone who has a story that just has to be told, drop me a line at thepeoplewemeetpodcast.com. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next time.